All right, everyone, welcome back to our latest installment. Today I'm with my good friend Monica Loughman,
Hello.
who I've known for
Oh, wow.
over a decade, I think.
Yeah.
We're starting to measure our friendship in decades, which is a
Yeah.
great sign. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about art and the intersection between art and commerce today.
Cool.
And Monica, you want to just let everybody know a little bit about yourself, where you're coming
Yeah,
from, and
sure.
kind of how you got to this place where you're at?
Yeah. I am an artist. I think like now I'm accepting that first and foremost, but I have an academic background in modern and contemporary art theory and criticism, and also art business. So I am right in that line of art as an intrinsic value to culture versus art as a commodity or art as an industry. And it's been a deep interest of mine to kind of see where those lines are blurred or how they intersect, and like what makes good art. Like, is that just subjective, or is that like, is there a way we do that? And we definitely do that, specifically in the contemporary world. But yeah, I mean, do you have any like specific questions? I mean, we talked a little bit earlier about how those things intersect, but is there one?
Yeah, I think I'd love to get your take. It's something that I've thought about many times, that there do seem to be artists, and I come more from a musical background. I'm not
Right.
highly knowledgeable on fine art, particularly like current fine art, which is part of the reason I was interested in talking. But coming at it from a musical background, there seems to be artists who are able to be commercially successful, sometimes on a massive scale, and yet don't seem to have to sacrifice their uniqueness and authenticity and even their respect from the more hardcore art world in order to attain that commercial success. So like recent examples I could see in just current pop music, artists like Billie Eilish, Halsey,
Right.
Kendrick Lamar,
Right.
cases like that where they still seem to have artistic respect and
But they're
still
popular.
but they're popular, and they're top 40 and they're selling tons of albums and
Yeah.
selling out tours, and yet they still seem to have respect. Whereas you have other people that are like tarred with the brush of selling out,
Right.
or other people that are commercially successful but no one considers them to have artistic
And then
merit.
like people forget about them in 10 years.
People
And
forget
it's
about
like,
them. Or they
you
become
hear
a
about them
joke
at,
in
like
10 years.
Like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, remember that horrible song by
Right.
whomever? And it's like, dang, yeah.
I had that.
What was that? How was that even allowed to be created? But
Yeah, I had that thought when, I mean, not knocking on them too much, but I remember, when we were little kids and the Backstreet Boys were the biggest band in the world, and then a couple years ago I was at a record store and I was looking through the bargain bin,
Yeah.
and I flipped to the next one. It was Millennium by Backstreet Boys for $1.99, and I was like, I remember when they couldn't print enough of those to get out to
they
the
were
stores.
$28.99
Yeah,
at Target.
$28.99, and they couldn't keep the shelf stock.
Right.
And this is only like 15 years later. So I guess I'd like to get your take on kind of what do you think makes for an artist that can bridge that gap of commerce and artistic value?
I think it is. So it is just like a little bit different when you're working with contemporary art versus like when you think of like famous artists, you're always kind of recalling famous artists in art history, like Leonardo da Vinci and like Picasso, obviously, or Jackson Pollock, and like those people, even then, like fame and fortune were completely differently defined. And I can go down that rabbit hole, but like just to put it into more recent times, I think like you see a huge shift in between like the big pinnacle shift between what art can be also as a commodity, and how that can inform art historical theoretical success as well as financial success. And a big person to bring up is Castelli, who is a dealer in New York, who is also the person that is representing Jackson Pollock, and he just like knew how to sell the work, and a big part of that was making sure that these artists were written about and talked about by the biggest art thinkers like Goldberg and and so since then it's like you had publications in the 50s and 60s that showed all the AbX painters, abstract expressionist painters of New York, like on the cover. Like it's never been like the avant-garde is first and foremost popular artwork. It's like that stuff that's happening in the background that nobody realizes is culturally important until later on in the future, where they're like, this was what the norm was, and these people were doing this. Like that line of what was known as good artwork was getting further, like good artwork was going further in another direction, where it was like, it's actually the original thoughts, not the perfection of what has happened before, but like going against the Academy and or like the salons of Paris and like,
right. Does some of that have to do, you think, with you don't know what the norm is really till you're past it?
I think I think in terms of the great art critics, there is a delay. But you have the norm happening, and then artists actively responding to the norm and saying, you know what, that's not how I'm going to create like big impressionist modernist painting that's exactly what's happening. And it's just like, here are these different thoughts that we have that we need to explore as art, and it should be recognized as art, not like degenerative art, which was used a lot. So I think again, Leo Castelli, the dealer, was like, okay, realizing maybe it's the stuff that has never been done before, writing about it and making that delay between the critical and how highlighting different things was actually valuable in making work sellable.
Interesting.
So I think now it's like, today, like fast forward really, really quickly, because then you have a huge boom, and artists are being seen around the world, first and foremost, really rapidly, and being able to reach success within their lifetime.
I know that struck me as a really novel experience for an artist to be able to experience success in their lifetime, because you did have, like the Picassos and Da Vinci's and Michelangelos, who I understand, achieved pretty good success during their lifetimes. Obviously,
right,
trumped by their by later history and as their work developed in value, but they still were successful within their time. But to be cutting edge and to also experience the fruits of that success within a couple of years, it seems to me almost a brand new experience for artists. Yeah.
Right. And now we even go further, where we're almost more similar to the music industry, where it's like we have these huge popular artists that people still buy because of the name, because of the brand. And then those are also being criticized in it's different work, it's like new work, it's pop work, it's like conceptual or whatever the trend is, and people are like, I'm gonna buy into that, love that. And a lot of people being like, that was manufactured for a specific reason to be active, like in this commodification of art world, like
right, yeah.
Where it's like people like, for example, like Damien Hirst, who in the 90s was an amazing conceptual artist. A lot of people were like, that's shocking, that's so weird, like putting a dead shark in a huge tank of formaldehyde and like calling it eternal, I forget the name of it, it's super long, but it's all freezing these dead animals in time and space, and like everyone's like, wow, that's crazy, that's a crazy thought, like putting like a super trippy like title with it, and then like it becomes super popular, and then it hits auction and it's worth millions and millions of dollars.
Sure.
And then now today he's making these polka dot paintings, and they're still making millions and millions of dollars, but a lot of people are like, this guy just fucking sold out. Like, what are these? These are like, a lot of people are just like, this is kind of a joke. It's like, at this point, he already has a name, he's a brand. Anything he puts his name on is gonna make money. So does that
Yeah.
make good work?
Yeah.
Is that good work? Even if it ends up like in a museum because it was gifted by somebody that needed a tax write-off, like,
Yeah.
does that put it in the canon of art history?
Yeah. So what comes up for me, like based on what you just said, is there's perhaps a lot of it has to do with a sense that the public has that what is being produced is coming from the soul of the artist, but that it changes when the artists themselves kind of like goes meta on themselves, and they're basically treating like this is a Damien Hirst piece that I am no longer Damien Hirst. I am looking at that as an object that exists in the marketplace, and what would that object produce?
Right.
And then there's a separation between the two that you can sense in the product.
Totally. It's like, so are we looking? And I think, like, you asked me this before, like, what are your thoughts on like how this is all interacting? Like, literally it changes from everything, like every single piece I see or any kind of artist that I see, or like phenomena that's happening on the actual auction markets. And so you have to kind of ask yourself, like, is the work just good because it's the name, or like is the individual object that you're looking at critically a good piece of work that has something to say, that has an expressive quality, that has that inherent like value of art, like, which is, that can be different for everyone, but it's bottom line evocative in some way. And it's not just like, oh, let's get into this meta thing of like, is like Duchamp writing his name on a urinal, like, dang, that's kind of meta, but it's like, is that kind of trick like a trend now?
Sure, yeah.
So, or are there other works out there that don't do that? That might just be like, wow, that's a beautiful painting, or this is a beautiful, like, immersive experience. Like, is that might be harder to sell on the market, right? But is that a better piece of work? And like, I don't think there's no blanket, like most things today, there's no blanket answer. Like,
Sure.
And I think it's fun to kind of analyze and kind of question these interactions and like, well, I don't know, because in my art business courses, as a master's student, we were kind of taught like art as a business, like how do these people move from, like, what's the trajectory of success for an artist, and what are those either like characteristics, and it always starts with like, here's this person that was kind of like unknown. Obviously you have to become known some way, and usually in the art world that happens when you have good work, right?
Sure.
Going to a good undergrad program, or like even if you're not academically informed as an artist, have the thing that makes someone say, I'm interested in that. Like,
what do you think that is? Is it just the clear evidence of having put in your 10,000 hours on the craft?
No, so I think that's a really hard.
I mean, I guess I'm asking what the it factor is, and nobody has ever figured out the formula.
There's so many. Even if the world is full of just billions and billions of individuals. Like, a lot of people like Monet, but somebody can walk in and be like, I don't get it, like, like, and that's, again, that's like based on the individual experience. But then you also have in art criticism or art theoretical kind of understanding of like what that I guess, like, what that interest is made of. Sometimes it does have like, this is speaking in relation to what's happening contemporarily in the culture. Is it a response to something political? Is it a response to something emotional? That's also like that, to have some kind of a wider cultural value.
Sure.
And like, so that's, again, that's like a weird thing to kind of say when it's like, it's the emotional individual experience is different for everyone. But I think what the job of the art critic or the art historian is to be like, this had a deeper impact culturally, or has potential to have a deeper impact culturally, and here are the reasons why.
Okay. Another thing that comes up for me here that I was trying to, it seems almost like that would lend itself to kind of, you're trying to predict what is a good metaphor and what's not. Because I feel like a lot of art to me is creating a metaphor for some feeling that everybody is feeling in common. And again, coming from a music background, like a great pop song is something that frames an emotional state in a way that everybody can project their own version of that emotional state onto it. And the singer, you're kind of asked to identify with the circumstances of the singer.
Right.
But you're also basically projecting your own experience onto it. So it's like making good metaphors, but then when you're talking about cultural significance, it's like, you can always write a love song. Love will take different forms culturally, but that's a little bit more general. But
right.
I think like the more specific a moment you're capturing with a good metaphor, then perhaps you could say the more value it has. And the piece that I'm thinking of, I don't remember the name, but I'm pretty sure you told me about it when we were at the Art Institute in Chicago. I'll try to describe it and see if this rings a bell, where it was a pile of gumballs or a pile of candy.
Yeah.
And there was instructions to the museum goers to take one when they walked past.
Right.
And I don't know if there was a description or something that went with it that this was supposed to be a metaphor for the AIDS crisis.
Right.
Or the experience of somebody withering away from this disease.
Yeah, the piece is by artist Felix Gonzales-Torres, and it is a pile of candy in the corner of the museum, which takes on a minimalist and kind of like pop aesthetic qualities, right? So it's like, oh, this is just contemporary artwork. But then there is a didactic that if you take the time to read, and you're asked to take pieces of candy away. But there's, some words on the wall, on the placard on the wall, that describe the concept behind the piece, which is that this was Felix's lover who died of AIDS, and that it's really supposed to. It doesn't even tell you what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
But this candy is the exact amount of weight his lover was before he was diagnosed.
Oh, that's right.
So that's the marker of time. And as people take away, it dwindles, and eventually it's not restocked every day. It's not, it eventually disappears.
Yeah.
And that's it, that this pile of candy is the same weight as this person before they're diagnosed with AIDS.
Yeah, and to me, that strikes me as a brilliant metaphor using an unexpected set of materials.
Right.
That also involves you in an active role.
Right.
And to me, I would consider that an excellent piece of art. Also because it captures a very specific, both an individual experience that still speaks to a rather specific cultural period.
Right.
And in a way that, as a person that if you had no direct connection to that, you hear about that piece of art, or even, have the good fortune to be able to experience it, and immediately it's like, oh, I don't get it, and yet now I get it.
Yeah.
To me, that seems like a brilliant piece of art.
Brilliant piece of art, but does that make it a... And I completely agree. It's one of my favorite pieces I've ever been able to experience. But that's never going to make the same amount of money on the auction block as Picasso or any kind of relevant artist right now.
Yeah.
A Banksy or whatever. Even a Banksy is not going to go for as much as a Felix Gonzales-Torres. Or will go for so much more than a Felix Gonzales-Torres, because it's doesn't have those kind of market characteristics, like painting, things that are kind of known.
Yeah.
Because of their historical relevance, or just their existence for through art history as being this is what artwork is: portraiture, large paintings, paintings by for a long time male artists were written about, and they were the ones that went to art school and whatnot.
Right.
So female artists that exist at that same time still aren't making the same amount of money, but might be considered historically or critically the better artist. This one just has a market history. So that's like where, so it's a really strange thing, I think. And Felix Gonzales-Torres' piece and many of his pieces do exist and are institutionalized in museums.
Yeah.
So I think that's where you give it. It's a weird play because museums are the end goal, right? That's where it's going to get the most exposure. That's where the research for it's going to be done. That's where like the perpetuation of it being like historically, culturally relevant can exist. But sometimes museums are also, and even more frequently today, created, funded, or a lot of pieces are donated to by collectors.
Sure,
So that's so it kind of like, it's just like they just live together. Like that's the contemporary art world right now. That's the art world right now. So they kind of live together. So it's like, again, it's like looking at each piece and just being like, is this, I don't know.
So there seems like you have to have a foot in the realm of good metaphor and originality, but another foot at least partially situated in tradition, in something that has a market history.
Yeah.
And it seems like in order for new markets to emerge, it seems like that would be quite a process of slowly moving into
and that's
a new
like
medium.
if you want to be, I think that's if you want to be, if you want to see like commercial success in your life. And I don't think a lot of artists like do that, but there's definitely some. I think like the pop artists of the 60s were definitely like, Andy Warhol was like, I want to be famous and I know how to do this. I know how to play the game. And a lot of artists definitely do that.
I have to say I have a lot, and this kind of brings me into my next, I think, a segue into my next question, but I have to say I have a lot of respect for artists who kind of embrace that. Like, yes, I want to be famous. Why would I not want my work to be seen by as many people as possible?
Right.
And I think there can be...
Like, I have something to say. I know how to get it out there.
Yeah. People need it. People need to hear it. Right. Yeah. And there's also kind of like the counterpoint of that, like the artists are like, I do it for its own sake because it's what I do and I don't care if anybody ever sees it or likes it. It's just, this is my authentic product and it is what it is.
Right.
And that kind of makes me wonder, we were talking a little bit earlier about like, does art... I think it's fair to say we can kind of maybe just take it as a given that like, it does seem like there's better and worse art. Like that's a very broad thing to debate, but I think we can just take that. But within the realm of art that's at least pretty good, is there an intrinsic value to it, or does it have to have that social proof that you mentioned in order to have value? Like as a painting that is written about and appreciated and held in museums, does that give it... is that what gives it the value, or is there something just purely related to the artistic intention that was put into it that just gives it value, that no matter even if it's unknown, it still could be better than anything that's ever been done?
I think that's where I think that's exactly, the intrinsic value is a thing that sparks good work. Like the fact that people can, or a critic, or like just the thing to make it largerly, like as a larger cultural relevant thing, something that's a good artwork, I think it starts with, dang, there is something here. Like a point of interest, and that could be, I mean, that can happen in so many levels. It could be, I don't know, just an individual looking at someone painting in the park, just being like, wow, that's a really great piece. I can see what you're doing there. Like, I see what you're painting, and I can't believe you're translating it in this way. Yeah. But it starts with, like, I think when that value, that the value is found in that intrinsic expression, like going beyond the individual. Yeah. And like, I don't know, it's such a hard, intangible thing, but it's like... Yeah. And so it's hard to describe, but I think that's where it starts. It has to have a point of like interest, either visually or I think sonically that can happen too. Sure.
Yeah, I was thinking like, with to map it onto music, I was thinking great songs, there's always a hook. Right. There's an initial thing that catches your ear and invites you into the song that makes you give it a chance. Yeah. with visual art in particular, there's got to be something that catches your eye.
Right, and I think like that's what people might have. That's where we get the word like beauty. Like there's something happening here that like these things in relationship to each other, either on a canvas using color. Like there's something beautiful about that, or just, it can have like any kind of
or the subject matter, a very striking subject will often catch my eye.
Or a lot of people. There's a reason why realism has such a place in history, in art history. It's like it's the story, like, and we realize the body, and like we can realize like that's not just someone's emotion or expression, like that's a tree, and look at how they did that, like there's a reason why realism is always going to have a place, and it always changes, and like right now I definitely think with a lot of contemporary artists within the gallery scenes, like fresh emerging artists, there's definitely another turn towards realism and figurative paintings for sure.
Interesting. Okay.
And there might be a lot of reasons why that is, but I think I guess there's no it's such a hard question, but I think it really is like the work just having that, whoa, this is good, and then someone being really good at being like, I'm gonna tell you why this is so good. This is how I had this reaction. And really clearly being like, let me take you on this journey of what this work is, or what my reaction to it was, and make it a bigger thing. Like, and I think that's the role of the critic again. That's the role of an art writer. And sometimes that's the role of a gallerist.
Sure.
And an auction house.
Sure. I think people trash critics a lot, and there's plenty of critics of all mediums that I feel like would qualify as hacks. But on the other hand, being a fairly analytical type myself, I have definitely been talked into appreciating a piece of art of many mediums by a critic who spelled out its value to me and made me look at it in a fresh light. So I would absolutely defend the critic in that regard.
And some might say that today we lack art criticism, or that art criticism is dead, because it's such a weird thing, like especially if the money side of everything is a pretty profitable industry. The contemporary art world alone made $12.5 billion in 2020, and
that's crazy.
Yeah, and people are just like, what? No, it's a huge, it's a booming industry, and it gets bigger and bigger every year. But guess what? The critic isn't necessary in that world, in that ecosystem. That ecosystem is these blue chip galleries that kind of see who's coming out of MFA residency programs, or even smaller galleries. And like when someone sells, or when there's a lot of hype behind somebody, either institutionally or like at a smaller gallery, poach.
Yeah.
Put it in their program, get the best, know how to write about it, get some good curators now that, are part of the gallery team. So, incentivized to write positively about the work, right? Not
a PR slant. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So they're not, the curator is not necessarily a critic today.
Sure.
Unless you're at a museum, and that's different. But like a gallery curator is not a critic. So there are many of those, but there are not many there's like maybe a handful, like Jerry Saltz is one of them, and people that are actively out there kind of like writing about what's going on in the art world, or
that are fairly impartial, I guess.
That are impartial, that are, have their eye on the bigger movement of the beast, and like, are NFTs gonna last, or like what's the relevancy of NFTs in this like bigger scope, where we still have this very gallery centric operating art world. So
the idea of NFTs is fascinating to me, because it seems like it could be a new step in the world of art, and that it seems to me like it would almost completely remove, at least for a while,
Right.
completely remove the role of the critic and purely be based on the value that a community placed on a
Right.
certain digital item.
Right.
And in kind of what I've been reading recently about NFTs, the ones that tend to have the most value are the ones that are associated with a game or some kind of online community that already
Right.
exists,
Right.
where there isn't any critical consensus that this is valuable. It's simply something that a lot of people have agreed has value because of their love for whatever
Yeah.
online environment
Right.
it occurs in.
Right.
Or
Whatever.
a meme,
Whatever.
or a
They,
meme being
yeah. Yeah.
a meme being extremely valuable is another function of that. It's like, if somebody can own the rights to this thing that has been shared millions and millions of times and add some scarcity to what was previously infinitely replicable,
Right.
there's no critical role in there. It's just like, the collective mind has spoken on something and
Right.
now it has value.
Right. I mean, it's a weird. Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, that's a nice segue into like, what do you think? Obviously, it's so new, nobody knows. There's no hard answers, but like, what's your intuition about what kind of what people are calling the the digital exodus that might be coming with the talk of the metaverse and improvements in virtual reality, like what that will do for art as things kind of take off as like digital media takes off into three dimensions, so to speak.
Yeah. It's a weird concept. It's definitely like a theory that, I mean, that might happen. Like,
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I heard
are we
somebody
really
say,
going to value, like, people are buying $300 million paintings at auction, and then they keep them in a storage bin all year, and then
Sure.
they move around. They're never seen. They're not put in their house. They don't have a physical need to see this thing or interact with it.
Yeah.
It's just like, here's this thing
yeah,
of some value that I own, and it doesn't matter where it is.
yeah,
So I think it'd be weird because art for so long is based off of everything based off of physical characteristics and value. But if it's all about the intrinsic, if it's all about the conceptual value of okay, this thing has kind of been written about and has this kind of life of its own, and it's worth so much money, the physical thing is just secondary, basically. I feel like it's possible to get to that point.
That's true, because you could consider an original Picasso to be incredibly valuable, even though you've never actually seen it in your own life.
That's how most people think about art. I think a lot of people think about art now, the Mona Lisa.
Right.
What the heck, the Mona Lisa? It's
some people have seen. More people have probably seen that than most famous paintings, but that's still a very small segment of society.
And the only reason why that is such a the most popular painting, or Starry Night, or any Van Gogh or Picasso that's been replicated and put on a mug, t-shirt, bag, on the internet as an image, people know what you're talking about, and so they've seen it in this digital realm. They might not have seen the actual painting or have experienced what it looked like in person. And if it is a visual experience, if it is what makes the thing valuable is intangible and subjective, then maybe you don't necessarily need the physical object.
Sure, yeah. And to me that seems like what an NFT is really getting at, that there's this intangible value that almost it's making a digital correlate of that value that's just kind of in our mind.
Right.
That's a mouthful, but
that's
yeah.
Yeah. That being said, I don't think maybe that's possible for work in the future. I don't think anyone would pay the amount of money, again, to bring up the Mona Lisa, just because it is so popular.
Yeah.
If someone were to drop an insane amount of money on the Mona Lisa, they hang it in their dining room.
Yeah.
Just to I have this thing. I don't think the number of the digital NFT, like that would, I think it would be so much significantly lower. It just like, okay, I own the image of this thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the Mona Lisa. Mm-hmm. It's the image of the Mona Lisa. Whereas like it's a little more, and it has more weight to use a very physical word.
Yeah.
To have this thing that has been kind of, I don't know, stamped as priceless.
Right. And to me, I think it'll really, like, whatever value NFTs or the metaverse, whether it turns out to be a temporary fad that's nothing or the most influential thing in the next 100 years.
Right.
It could go either way, I think. But
yeah.
But a lot of it, like you're mentioning, the physical examples, the weight of having something.
Right.
And a lot of it, I think, will just depend on how comfortable we are leaving the physical realm, so to speak. And if we get more comfortable with that, then maybe the physical presence and experience of something will not have the value that it used to. But I have to say that in my own experience, like standing in front of a physical painting and kind of being in its presence does have a different and more powerful effect than looking at it on a screen. And I even remember this as a little kid. Like, my uncle was a great painter, and he did oil paintings. And for a while, he was really fond of using very large canvases. Yeah. And especially as a little kid, being small in stature and standing in front of one of these canvases, you feel a sense of reverence that you kind of have to, like, be quiet and grant some space to this thing that's right in front of you that you don't feel really with it on a screen.
Yeah, well, I think, again, the physical qualities in many paintings, again, if we're going to talk about that, and lots of artwork, is so important to that experience, right? Scale, medium, the texture of the thing, the depth that how all these compositional qualities work together to create that intrinsic, like, value, or that evocative thing that happens. And that's not, you're not going to get that if you're, an image is going to be delivered to you the same way. Depending on your screen, maybe a little bit bigger depending on your screen size. But it's it's not, so it's different. That being said, I think, like, new media, digital work, photographs, obviously, sonic pieces, that go beyond music, and performances that are videotaped. Things that require digital technology. I think those will be the things to actually will be able to survive a little bit longer, because people are buying them and more people are looking at them, and artists will have more of a chance to make money off of their work, because those works do not fare well on the market at the moment.
One thing to kind of jump on that, one thing that just came up for me is I'm thinking about with the school that I teach at. There's mostly kids from like 9 to 12 years old, and they spend a lot of time interacting and, for all intents and purposes, living in the worlds of the online games Fortnite and Roblox. And one thing that just occurred to me with what you're saying is that kind of with the change of medium and the physicality of artwork is a big component of those games. I would add Minecraft as well to that list. They spend a lot of time on that. A big component of all three of those games is creating worlds, where there's a physical, so to speak, a physical element, and also something you can live in, so to speak. So you can build a world that then the avatars can live in and act in. So I could almost see a new marketplace of, like, world building art emerging, where you could live in a beautifully designed digital universe. That as the technology improves, I could see that being a possibility.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure like that's a really interesting point, and I'll definitely like research that. I'm sure there are artists out there doing just that right now. And I think that's just one of the many opportunities that could happen for new medias, and like a chance to progress, like a chance to like say what would be really cool if this, like, if I could actually get people behind this, or like gain a following, like how that will like inform that artist practice, or like further like move the field forward, and like ask the questions that make I guess some work like really culturally relevant, like this is, I don't know, it's like it's possible,
because I feel like in a lot of ways what you're, and maybe this might be a good thing to close on here to get your thoughts on this, but it seems to me, because you also mentioned at the beginning that you consider yourself an artist first and foremost, which stood out to me. And to me, my impression of a lot of what art is coming into contact with the real world, so to speak, and then having a reaction either to confronting something unknown or mysterious about the real world and immediately generating some kind of guess as to what that unknown thing is, or reacting in a negative way against the way things are and envisioning a way things could be.
Yeah.
And I think you can see that a lot in novels, which are basically a form of world creation.
Yeah.
That you see the world the way it is, and then you don't like it, and so you create a new world where things are the way that you think that they should be, and people resonate or don't with that world.
I think that's such a good, insightful way of looking at how artwork is produced, because it's so true. It's like either no matter what it is, it's someone's translation of an outside, or like even like a existential thing. And it's like, how do I need to translate either my, like you said, your questioning of it, or like for me, it's a literal translation of an experience that I might have had, and trying to like recreate that for somebody else, or recreate it for myself, for my memory, or just because I want to, like something really stuck out about me about this one thing, and try to harbor that in myself, and then like move it out and be like, and through that moving of and creating, like understanding it and understanding why maybe it's why it had that effect on me, but I think that's the other side. It's like either critical response to that experience, or wanting to dive deeper into it, or using your tools to like the tools, the things around you that tap into that concept, whatever it is, or and then becoming physical. That's a huge part of it too. And I think like if that is such a huge part of it, and you're a digital artist or an immersive artist or someone that is wanting to create these virtual pieces of work, if that's where you're working, obviously you're not going to be like, here's a painting and here's a picture of my painting, and like I'm going to NFT that. It's like, no, I'm going to create like a digital piece that
it seems
might
to me
question, or like might be critical of this whole thing.
Right. But it seems to me like every piece of art is kind of asking you to live in its world for a second.
Yeah.
And the world of the artist. And that may be a pointed criticism of the world as it is.
Yeah.
Or to go back to the remind me of the artist with the candy?
Felix Gonzales-Torres.
Felix Gonzales-Torres. Right there, he's asking you to live in that world for a second.
Yeah.
Live this experience for a second. So, like, world building, even in a tiny little fragment like that, is kind of coming up for me as maybe like an essential characteristic of art, which does make me in a way excited about the potentials of this digital exodus for art, along with the many pitfalls that I think will accompany such a move. In a way, the ability to literally construct new worlds.
Right. I mean, listen, I think like I again, it's like that's all possible. Like anything is possible, and if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen whether or not it's good or bad.
That
and
is
I think
very,
it's like,
I think that is
like,
I think it's like an essential insight to have in life. It's gonna happen.
It's because things happen so quickly, I think, in our culture today, where it's like, is it good, is it bad? And like by the time someone is like, okay, I've done my research, I have like an informed decision on how I stand on this, something else happens, it's like, okay, well, now I have a different opinion.
Right, yeah.
It's like, and it happens at such a rapid pace because of, I think, the internet, media, and all these things that are digital and virtual and spread so quickly. Like, if we do move into this metaverse, like, that's where we're at. And like,
yeah.
So what do you do? So where art history as we've had it in the past is still going to exist as a line of thinking. It's been recorded and, like it's always going to exist. I guess, I don't know, that's just my stance on it. It's like, okay, well, once we're in it, like we'll know when we're in it. Yeah. And like we can be like, what's good about this? What's bad about it?
Right.
But until we're there, it's like, okay, that's possible. That's cool to think about and to like kind of maybe forecast how we might think about it. But
yeah,
we won't know until we're in it. And if it doesn't happen, then it doesn't like.
Yeah, but even
I think it would take a very long time.
Yes, I don't think that the vast majority of people, myself included, are anywhere near ready to fully live in a digital universe.
I think I'm definitely going to be dead before a physical object is worth less or is not regarded as more valuable than a physical object versus a digital object is like the way to go. It's the way it is. And it's been that way for so long. It's been that way since the dawn of humanity. Sure. Like it's going to take a minute to change, and I'm definitely going to be dead by the time it does. So. Yeah.
I think I will be too. I think it's interesting though, like as maybe a closing point, to think that there is. It's tempting to like see something like this as like, oh, this will be the death of humanity. This will be the death of art. But in reality, like even if we move into a new world, artists will still be interpreting that move, and we'll still be living in their worlds and interpreting it ourselves. It seems to me like ludicrous to think that will be the death of art. I mean, I feel like it will just be a new frontier.
Yeah. I think art is and has always been like one of those essential factors for humanity to move forward. Yeah. It's just so it's never going to go away. How it morphs as we morph is is just that. It's like it'll still exist, it'll just be different. I don't know.
It's hard to see around the corner on that.
But like and maybe like I don't know. I think it would be really hard for some like a lack of like good art like also being the downfall of humanity. I think there's other things that exist that might be more important than art. Uh-huh. I mean, that's really hard for me to say, but like because I think I think it's a really realistic thing to say, but it's not a good thing to say perhaps because before people think and read and look or listen or can be able to have these artistic experiences, like they need time. They need like so obviously I think like the downfall of humanity would look something more like a where the real things that we require for existing fall apart, like food, environments, sure. Like. But then I think maybe art will still exist. Art will still exist in those times. Maybe it's a way that people.
I mean, there's still cave art at a time which was primarily focused on obtaining food.
But that's moving. If that's moving forward, though, if we're going backwards, it's a good question to think about for sure, and be hopeful that like people will always have the need to be expressive. Yeah. I think it never gets that bad where that can't happen. But,
I think obviously physical needs are the bedrock. I mean, you can't survive without food. But to me, like, I would basically count myself in this camp. Like, I feel like most people wouldn't really want to live in a world that's just purely about, the
Right.
physical, and that there is no room to just take that moment to appreciate the world and to appreciate something artistic. That like
Yeah.
there's no point in living without it, even though it may not be the bedrock essential.
Right.
It's a
Life
it's a
would be
byproduct that doesn't.
so dreary.
It's a byproduct that it isn't worth living without.
Right. Yeah. I would agree with that, and I'm hope that it is true in the future forever.
Yeah.
Until like asteroids hit the Earth.
Right. Yeah. I know.
People are still playing some music or like painting or like I don't know, screaming. And, I mean, even maybe that's it. Maybe some people like hypothesize that the first artistic expression ever in humanity before the cave drawings or whatever was a cry or a scream.
Yeah.
Was a noise.
Yeah.
It was a reaction.
That's probably true. Yeah, a shout of triumph and of pain. Or maybe not of pain, because I feel that might be like a reflexive reaction, but like a war cry.
Yeah, something that's communicating.
Yeah.
It's definitely a communicative, like, performative thing
but it doesn't point to some specific concrete object. Like you could have a certain grunt that stands for mammoth and a grunt that stands for a person. But like a war cry is something more abstract.
Yeah,
it's
like
an
kind
emotion.
of sublime. It's scary and beautiful and like facing death and being like.
But all those things are concepts. They're not something that's right there, and that
totally
that is an artistic output. Yeah.
Yeah. So
from a scream,
maybe art is intangible and it's like inherent. I don't know.
I think that's the conclusion. From a scream to the metaverse and beyond.
That's it.
That's where we're at.
Oh, Jesus. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time. That was illuminating for me, and
I had a lot of fun.
I have quite a bit of art to look. That's something that I really want to fill in the gaps on my own education is art.
The thing is, like, it's fun for me to talk about because unless I'm in a specific like circle, like artistic circle, like these are things that people are talking about that are involved within this kind of niche world that I'm in, art business and art theory, and it's like, so it's fun to kind of explain it because it's unlike anything else.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Monica, it's been a pleasure, and
Thank you,
I'm sure we'll do another reunion soon. Maybe
That'd
with
be
Ben.
great.
Yeah.
Well,
all right. Thank you.